And elusively, Jackson goes in, but it's the bottom of the backboard of Coach Ty Lue. He'll melt into the defense and take it up and off, and a foul. Vanderbilt. Zubats had the ball knocked away. Minnesota ramming his way into the 2 or 3s. Missing there. Big time rebound by the tumbling. Towns is fouled out. Fouls out at the 7:34 mark of the 4th.
That won't go, and that'll do it. The Grizzlies do it again.
When Gobert and Towns play together, it's a borderline catastrophe. It's panic time, House.
Towns and Gobert through a dozen games can't play together.
Who could have guessed that?
51 games since these Timberwolves fans have seen you and they missed you.
Finally gets it to him. Edwards launches. No! And Denver survives.
We got everything we need. We just got to continue to work with each other.
It's time for the Minnesota Timberwolves to move on from Karl-Anthony Towns.
The issue with Cat is this. He is a losing personality.
For anyone that says in the modern game, 3 bigs can't work, what's your message?
Yeah, watch us.
Karl-Anthony Towns is one of the most polarizing players in the entire NBA. On one hand, he's one of the greatest shooting big men of all time and an all-world offensive talent. But on the other hand, sometimes the moment seems to be too big for him, and some have even called him not a winning player. The past 2 years have been especially rough in the Cat discourse, especially with the addition of Rudy Gobert and the disappointing results that came thereafter. But after a fully healthy offseason for Cat and Minnesota, the Timberwolves are now sitting atop the Western Conference at 39-16, and Towns is having himself a phenomenal year. As we approach the 2024 NBA playoffs, I believe this is Karl-Anthony Towns' moment. Will he show us that he has changed and he is the player we all hoped he could be, or will he again struggle? This is the potential redemption of Karl-Anthony Towns. On June 25th, 2015, the Minnesota Timberwolves selected Karl-Anthony Towns with the #1 overall pick in the 2015 NBA draft, which marked the Timberwolves' first #1 overall pick in their franchise history. And with that first pick was a lot of pressure coming with it. The Wolves had not had a winning season in a decade and had had little success in their 26-year history as a franchise outside of Kevin Garnett. Could Karl-Anthony Towns be the player they needed, do what even Kevin Love couldn't do, bring the Timberwolves back to some sort of relevance? But outside of the 2017-2018 Jimmy Butler season, Karl-Anthony Towns' first 6 seasons wouldn't include a winning record either. It was more of the same old for the Timberwolves. But midway through the 2020-2021 season, Coach Ryan Saunders, a good friend of Karl-Anthony Towns, was fired and replaced by Toronto Raptors assistant coach Chris Finch. The Timberwolves had just drafted first overall pick Anthony Edwards as well. And finally, the following season in 2021-2022, they started to experience some success. While we can't really fault Karl-Anthony Towns for the first 6 seasons of his career, he went through 3 different coaches, 5 different general managers, and just absolutely zero continuity. It was the 2021-2022 season where his reputation and legacy started being questioned. Minnesota would go 46-36, finishing 7th in the Western Conference and entering the newfound play-in tournament, largely on the back of Karl-Anthony Towns, who would be an all-star that season, get 3rd-team All-NBA, and average 24.6 points per game, 9.8 rebounds, and shot 53% from the field. But in that first play-in game versus the Los Angeles Clippers, Karl-Anthony Towns would be a complete non-factor. As a matter of fact, he was a detriment to his team, scoring 8 points, going 3-for-11 from the field, and fouling out with 7 minutes and change to go in the 4th quarter. As you saw in the intro and now, these fouls were pretty ridiculous for the most part. They were boneheaded plays, they were out of control, and there was a lot of immaturity that seemed to be centered around them. The Timberwolves would go on to win that game 109-104, largely on the backs of 20-year-old second-year player Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell, who had 30 and 29 points respectively. As embarrassing of a performance as it was for the Timberwolves' so-called leader, he had a whole playoff series ahead of him to redeem himself, matching up with the second-seeded Memphis Grizzlies. And in game 1 of this series, he would do just that, scoring 29 points with 13 rebounds, defeating the Memphis Grizzlies 130-117 on their home floor. Unfortunately, games 2 and 3 wouldn't go as well, with game 3 blowing 2 25-plus point leads in both halves. No thanks to Cat, who only took 4 field goal attempts in that game, scoring 8 points and having 5 fouls. But in game 4, in Cat-like fashion, he would bounce back, scoring 33 points, staying out of foul trouble, and shooting 14 for 17 from the free throw line, willing his team to a game 4 win, evening up the series 2-2. In game 5, Minnesota would blow another double-digit lead in the second half, and although Cat would score 28 points and have 12 rebounds, he also had 7 turnovers and 5 fouls again. And in game 6, he would score 18 points, have 10 rebounds, as the Wolves would blow another 10-point lead in the fourth quarter, losing 114-106. The story of this series was so frustratingly hopeful. The Timberwolves just could not stay ahead when they would build a lead, but at the same time, it looked like they were the better team in that series. The problem is when you combined the couple low points that Cat had in this series with the awful performance he had in the play-in, and if you combine that with the foul trouble, some of the boneheaded plays, and the constant whining that he had to officials after committing fouls, while supposedly being the #1 player on this team, he ended up getting a certain reputation in basketball circles that I'm sure every one of you are aware of. And I can say as a Timberwolves fan that it is an emotional roller coaster having Karl-Anthony Towns on your team, because in one moment, he's unstoppable on the offensive end. In another moment, he's getting into foul trouble and costing his team the game. And then the Rudy Gobert trade happens, and everybody hates how much Minnesota gave up for him. Plus, nobody thinks him and Karl-Anthony Towns can play alongside each other. And of course, it doesn't go well right away. It looks clunky in the first 13 games they play together. The Wolves go 5-8. A couple weeks later, Karl-Anthony Towns tears his calf, is out a majority of the rest of the season. By the time he comes back and everyone starts paying attention again, there's only a couple weeks left in the NBA regular season. The Timberwolves disappointingly go 42-40. They get in the play-in versus the Lakers. They lose without Rudy Gobert. Karl-Anthony Towns has 5 fouls again, a lot of them very foolish fouls. And although he plays well in that game, all anyone's seeing is the fact that the Timberwolves lost and Cat was in foul trouble again. The Timberwolves then fall in 5 games to the Denver Nuggets. Cat averages 18 points per game, 10 rebounds, but only shoots 45% from the field, 25% from 3, and has double the amount of turnovers than anyone else on his team. So again, although Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert only got to play a handful of games together, the narrative going into the 2023 offseason was this: the Timberwolves have no choice but to trade Karl-Anthony Towns. But if you were paying attention closely, you knew that Chris Finch, Tim Connolly, and all of the Wolves brass said they did not have enough time to see if this thing would work. They were going to run it back for one more season. And thank God they did. Which brings us to the premise of this video. We are sitting here on Wednesday, February 21st, post All-Star break. The Timberwolves are the #1 seed in the West. Karl-Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, everyone on this team has been healthy all year long, and they have looked the part, going 39-16 through their first 55 games. They have the NBA's best defense by a pretty wide margin, with an efficiency rating of 108.2 points per 100 possessions. And Cat is having a fantastic season, averaging 22.5 points per game, 8.4 rebounds, while shooting 51% from the field, 43.7% from 3, and 88% from the free throw line. And if we filter those stats from January 1st on, it gets even better. He's averaging 24.2 points per game on 53% from the field, 47% from 3 on 5.8 attempts per game, 7.2 rebounds, and a true shooting percentage of 66.1%. Quite frankly, nobody thought the Timberwolves would be in the position they are this deep into the NBA season, but there's still plenty of question marks. Not just the Timberwolves, but Karl-Anthony Towns has to answer. It was incredible to see Cat get recognized in the All-Star game, making his 3rd one, and to put up 50 points, but the rest of the NBA world still isn't taking him seriously. And that's why I believe the 2024 NBA playoffs are going to be a legacy-defining moment for Karl-Anthony Towns. If you've watched the Timberwolves this year, he's been a lot more mature when it comes to complaining to officials, and even with offensive fouls or boneheaded plays, he's just been a lot sharper. He's also been assisting Rudy a ton this year, especially on alley-oop, something that never happened the previous season in the short time they had. But the bottom line is that his overall reputation has not changed at all in the basketball world just yet. He has to prove it in the 2024 playoffs. I don't think that anybody is asking for him to be the one to carry this team. Everybody knows this is Anthony Edwards' team, and Karl is completely fine with that. He loves Ant. Ant's one of the best leaders in the NBA from an emotional intelligence perspective. The Wolves culture is super strong, but he does need to be a very, very close 1B to Ant. And I would go as far as to say that if the Timberwolves can make the Western Conference Finals and Karl-Anthony Towns can just average what he averaged in the regular season in the playoffs and not foul out or make some oblivious mistakes repeatedly, I think there's a good chance that his reputation begins to be redeemed and we start to see a redemption arc for a player that had such high hopes coming into the league. Another thing to keep in mind as well is that Cat is 28 years old. This is his golden age, his official prime, and I think that with that has come a certain level of maturity this season compared to last or the seasons before. So what do you think? What does Karl-Anthony Towns need to do to achieve redemption in the eyes of the basketball world at large? I think it's Western Conference Finals minimum, and just not having poor series or really bad moments that cost games. I also think that some of the hate that comes with Cat is just odd, and it's not necessarily fair, making fun of his voice, making fun of the love that he has for Minnesota and the team that he plays for. He's an emotional guy, and at any point in his first 6 seasons, he could have forced his way out of Minnesota after what Jimmy Butler did to him, after all of the disorganization and chaos that came with being a part of one of the worst franchises historically in NBA history. He could have easily said, I'm done with this. I'm going to go play for a contender. Get me out of Minnesota. But instead, he stuck with it. Even when they fired his really good friend, Ryan Saunders, he called Chris Finch. He welcomed him with open arms, and he's always done, I believe, what's best for the team. And that's one thing about Cat as a teammate that I don't think a lot of people pay attention to. Everyone talks about this power struggle between him and Ant over the past year and a half. And as a Wolves fan, I've never really seen it that way. Karl's an incredible teammate who's had Ant's back from the beginning, and even when a new GM came in the summer of 2023 and traded for a defensive-minded star that plays his position at the 5, he took it with a grain of salt, and he's completely reinvented himself as a 4 in the NBA, which is not an easy ask. But at the same time, the money is real. Cat's about to be making $60 million a year. He has to be an elite 1B to Anthony Edwards for this to work out in the long run. And that's why I think the 2024 NBA playoffs are so key to what the Timberwolves do in the future and to how we remember Karl-Anthony Towns as a player in his career. Because let's be honest, if he does what he did in 2022 again in these playoffs, the Timberwolves probably have no choice but to trade him this offseason. He's making too much money, and they're gonna go into the second apron paying the luxury tax. But if he's the player that we've seen he can be, especially this season, gelling so well with Rudy, with Ant, with Jaden, with Nas, then I think the perception is going to shift. And then from there, if the Wolves make a Western Conference Finals, they fall just short, it could be the beginning of them, the Thunder, the Nuggets, vying for the Western Conference for the next 3, 4, 5 years to come. Let me know what you think in the comments. Try to be fair and provide rational reasoning if you are going to critique Cat, or if you're going to praise him and think that his critiques are unwarranted. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, the YouTube algorithm thinks you'll enjoy this upload from me right here. And as always, we'll see you on the hardwood.